Pull up a stool. Yeah, right there.
Yeah.
Slide that glass over, and let's just take a breath.
Rough day.
You have no idea. But look, forget the NASDAQ queue for a second. Just put the phone face down.
Done.
Forget tech stocks, forget whatever startup is currently burning through its Series B funding, and definitely forget the quarterly earnings report that is probably waiting in your inbox right now.
I think we can all drink to that.
Right. We are turning the time machine dial tonight, and we are cranking it all the way back, past the Industrial Revolution, past the Middle Ages. We are going straight into the deep, dark Bronze Age.
So about 3,500 years ago?
Exactly. To a time when using oracle bones was basically the equivalent of sending a secure internal memo. And owning this massive, ridiculously heavy bronze vessel was a bigger flex than parking a private jet on the runway. We're looking at the Shang Dynasty.
It's a period that usually, well, it gets buried under a thick layer of academic dust.
Oh, totally.
But if you wipe that away, you are looking at a highly structured, ruthless organization.
A 500-year-old family business. That is the lens we're using for this deep dive tonight. Because I've been reading through the sources, the historical records, the archaeological summaries, and I swear it reads exactly like the life cycle of a massive, sprawling corporate empire.
It really does. The parallels are almost uncanny.
Right. You have your scrappy startup phase. You have the aggressive acquisition of market dominance. Then you get the mid-level management bloat, the catastrophic boardroom backstabbing, and finally, a CEO who spectacularly bankrupted the whole thing in a literal raging fire.
A very literal fire, yeah.
So we are dissecting the Shang enterprise. We're going to figure out how they cornered the market and how they let it all burn.
And like any hostile takeover, the story has to start with a failing industry leader. Because you do not get to disrupt a market unless the incumbent is already asleep at the wheel.
Yeah, and the incumbent in this case was the Xia dynasty, specifically a guy named Xia. Now look, everyone sitting at this bar, including you listening, has had a bad boss.
Oh.
The micromanager, the guy who takes credit for your presentation, the one who thinks a lukewarm pizza party makes up for 3 years of frozen wages.
Right.
Xia was the historical prototype for the toxic boss, but with absolute unchecked authority. The records paint him as a CEO who only knew how to squeeze.
And squeeze hard.
Yeah. He squeezed the peasantry, he squeezed his military, he squeezed the aristocrats. There was no vision, no long-term strategy at all, just relentless extraction of labor to fund this lavish, frankly ridiculous lifestyle.
Yeah, he was running a monopoly, and he made the classic mistake of actually treating it like one.
How so?
Well, when you have no visible competitors, you just assume your human capital is trapped. Xi operated on this assumption that he could infinitely extract value without ever reinvesting in the culture, the infrastructure, or even the basic survival of the people doing the heavy lifting.
Which brings us to the competitor who saw the opening. The founder of the Shang Dynasty, Cheng Tang.
A very shrewd man.
Very. I mean, if I'm Cheng Tang, I'm looking at the Xia Corporation, and I'm just doing the math. Xia has the military. He has the territory, the established supply chains. Trying to out-muscle him in a head-to-head war seems like a great way to get yourself executed.
It would have been suicide.
Right. So Cheng Tang doesn't do that. He goes the complete opposite route. He rebrands himself as the ultimate warm guy CEO. He basically pitches a non-toxic corporate culture.
It was a very calculated pivot.
Yeah.
Cheng Tang recognized that human capital was, well, it was the only currency that actually mattered in an agrarian society.
I read this and I thought it was a joke at first. Because being a nice guy doesn't win wars, right? Are you telling me he just set up an ancient LinkedIn profile offering decent work-life balance and that was enough to topple a dynasty?
Essentially, yes.
But you don't conquer a continent with employee satisfaction surveys.
You do when population size is the literal engine of your economy. Think about it. In antiquity, you didn't have automated assembly lines. Wealth was generated strictly by human muscle.
Right. Farming, building, all of it.
Exactly. Farming grain, smelting bronze, building defensive walls, it all required thousands of bodies. So if you position yourself as the benevolent alternative to a tyrant, you aren't just winning a PR campaign. You are triggering a mass migration of labor.
Oh, wow. So it's literally aggressive talent poaching.
Exactly. When peasants and skilled artisans flee these Xi territories and move to Shang territory, the Xi economy shrinks while the Shang economy grows.
A double whammy.
Right. Cheng Tang was draining Xiaji's workforce, his tax base, and his future military recruits without firing a single arrow. By the time the actual conflict happened, the Xi dynasty was just a hollowed-out shell.
Because the employees had already voted with their feet.
They had.
They bankrupted the competition by offering a better benefits package. I mean, I suppose that makes sense. So the Shia Corporation goes under. The Shang Dynasty takes over as the undisputed market leader. They hold the monopoly on bronze. They have the massive labor force. The startup phase is a total massive success.
But building a cohesive culture when you're the hungry underdog is one thing.
Yeah. Maintaining it when you're sitting in the corner office with zero competition, that is when the rot usually sets in.
It's the inevitable trap of the second and third generations. The visionary founder leaves the stage, and the heirs, who inherited all this wealth but never had to actually build the company from the ground up, they take over the board.
The ancient trust fund executives. And man, the records detail a period shortly after this golden startup phase, and historians literally call it the 9 generations of chaos.
A very fitting title.
9 generations. That is over a century of a massive multi-generational boardroom power struggle. You have brothers assassinating brothers, cousins undermining cousins.
How dysfunction.
Nobody is looking at the R&D. Nobody is checking the borders to see if the peripheral territories are even paying their taxes. They are entirely focused on internal factional politics, just fighting over who gets to wear the crown.
It's a state of institutional paralysis. When leadership is consumed by internal survival, the core business decays. The supply chains for copper and tin start to break down. The military garrisons at the borders get totally neglected. The corporate culture that Chang built evaporates into pure, toxic paranoia.
And it takes a deeply unsentimental guy to step into a mess like that and try to right the ship.
Right.
Which brings us to Pan Geng. A new CEO eventually takes control.
Yes, Bang Gang.
He looks at this dumpster fire of an administration. He sees the nepotism, the entrenched middle management, the absolute dysfunction in the capital city, and he decides the only way to fix the company is a massive office relocation. He orders the entire capital to just pack up and move to a place called Yin.
It was a logistical undertaking that is really difficult to overstate. Moving an ancient capital wasn't just about moving people.
No.
It meant moving the massive bronze foundries, the ancestral temples, the entire military apparatus.
Which is exactly why I scoffed when I read this part. I see this in the modern corporate world all the time, you know. A company is failing, the culture is toxic, the product is lagging, and some VP decides that moving to a shiny new open-plan office in a new city will magically fix the profit margins.
They think a change of scenery fixes structural rot.
Right. They put in a kombucha tap and pretend the fundamental issues are gone. But moving to a less developed area like Yin seems like a terrible idea. You are destroying your own supply lines and infrastructure just to spite middle management. How does that save the business?
It saves the business because the infrastructure in the old capital was the problem.
Wait, really?
Yes. Over those 9 generations of chaos, different aristocratic families had built up deeply entrenched power bases. They owned all the prime real estate. They controlled the local trade routes. They had networks of corruption that were physically baked into the geography of the city itself.
Oh, I see.
Pan Geng realized he couldn't just fire them all. He couldn't execute half his administration without triggering a massive civil war.
Let me guess. You move the capital to a swamp, and suddenly those local monopolies are totally worthless.
That is the mechanic of the reset, yes. By forcing a relocation to Yin, he stripped those rival factions of their geographical leverage. They had to leave their massive estates and their local bribing networks behind.
Wow.
It leveled the playing field. They were all forced back into a survival mindset, figuring out how to build a city from scratch. Sometimes, a brutal physical disruption is the literal only way to break an ossified corporate culture.
That is a remarkably cold, calculated management strategy. Just congratulations on your promotion to head of chariots. Your new office is in a muddy field 300 miles away. Here's a shovel.
It was harsh, but effective.
Yeah, looking at the timeline, it worked. The move to Yin stopped the internal bleeding. The company finally stabilized, which sets the stage for the next phase. Because you can't grow if you're constantly fighting over real estate.
Stability is the prerequisite. But it takes a specific type of visionary to turn a stable baseline into an actual golden age.
Enter the CEO who actually pulled it off. Wu Ding. The sources explicitly compare his impact to Steve Jobs.
It's a fair comparison.
He takes this massive legacy enterprise that has just been chugging along for centuries, and he rockets it to its absolute zenith. I mean, he oversees record territory expansion, massive leaps in product quality. But I'm stuck on how one guy actually does that. An organization that old is usually super resistant to change.
Well, Wu Ding utilized the clean slate that Pan Gang provided. But his real innovation was in human resources and operational control. He was obsessed with meritocracy over aristocratic pedigree.
In the Bronze Age, you're telling me a Bronze Age king ignored the nobility and promoted based on skill. The aristocrats with the private armies just let him do that.
He was incredibly strategic about how he enforced it. The records show Wu Ding elevating people from the absolute bottom of the social hierarchy. He promoted a guy named Fu Yu, who was literally a slave working on a construction wall, to be his prime minister.
That's insane.
To bypass the outrage of the nobility, Wu Ding used the ultimate corporate loophole. He used religious authority.
Oh, the oracle bones.
Precisely.
Okay, I need to pause here because we really need to talk about these bones. When I first read Oracle Bones, I pictured like some guy rattling a bag of chicken bones and throwing them on a wooden table. But this was a highly sophisticated bureaucratic technology, wasn't it?
It was the ancient equivalent of a centralized data server. They used turtle plastrons or the shoulder blades of oxen.
Right.
They would polish them, carve specific questions into them regarding military campaigns, harvests, or in this case, administrative appointments. Then they would apply an intensely hot bronze poker to a drilled hollow on the bone until it cracked.
Sounds intense.
The king would read the crack to divine the ancestor's will, and then they would meticulously archive the bone.
So Wu Ding wants to promote a slave to prime minister. He knows the board of directors, the aristocrats, will absolutely revolt. So he heats up a turtle shell, waits for it to crack, and says, look, guys, I don't want to promote this guy either, but the ancestors clearly stated in this crack that Fu Yu is the man for the job. Take it up with my dead grandfather. That is brilliant. It's a closed-loop system of absolute authority. You can't argue with an archived turtle shell.
He weaponized the state religion to bypass middle management entirely. And by putting highly competent people in charge, regardless of their background, he optimized the state machinery. He standardized their primary technology, too.
The bronze.
Yes, the bronze casting during Wu Ding's reign reached a level of sophistication that was simply unmatched.
Let's talk about the bronze, because owning a bronze ding vessel back then was the ultimate status symbol. I'm looking at pictures of these things while researching this. They are massive, heavy cauldrons with these intricate animal faces cast into the metal. Why was this such a flex? Like, why couldn't anyone just make one in their backyard?
Because of the massive logistics required to produce it, bronze is an alloy of copper and tin. Those metals are very rarely found in the same geographic location.
So you have to transport them.
Over huge distances. To make a single massive vessel, you need a military to secure the mines, a trade network to transport the ore safely, and a massive agricultural surplus to feed the hundreds of specialized laborers working the kilns.
Oh, okay.
You have to get the kilns to over 1,000 degrees Celsius. You have to use a complex piece mold casting method where the ceramic molds are carved in negative relief, assembled perfectly, and then the molten metal is poured in without cracking the mold.
So having a bronze ding vessel in your ancestral temple wasn't just about having a shiny pot to show your friends. It was a physical proof of concept. It proved you controlled a massive, complex supply chain, like having your own semiconductor fab today. It means your barrier to entry is just untouchable.
Exactly. It was the ultimate demonstration of operational dominance. Wu Ding verticalized the supply chain. He made the Shang brand synonymous with the absolute highest tier of technology and power in the known world.
So the stock is splitting, the brand is invincible. But I'm old enough to know that in the business world, invincible usually just means about to drive off a cliff.
Success breeds complacency, yes. But generational, unchallenged success breeds a very specific type of destructive arrogance.
Right, the golden age creates a blind spot. The immense wealth generated by Wu Ding's operational dominance didn't just disappear, it compounded over generations. And eventually, all that capital landed squarely in the lap of the company's final CEO, King Zhu, the man who bankrupted a 500-year-old monopoly.
The archetypal bad executive. But really not in the way most people assume.
Right, this is where the history gets genuinely tragic, honestly. Usually when a massive company collapses, you assume the guy at the top was a total moron. You picture an incompetent, babbling fool who doesn't even know how to read a balance sheet. But the records are incredibly clear about King Zhu. He wasn't stupid.
Not at all.
He was brilliant, he was physically imposing, intellectually sharp, and an incredible debater. He could win any argument against his ministers. He had all the raw stats of a top-tier Fortune 500 CEO.
He had extremely high capability possibility, but disastrous application. Intelligence without humility is a massive liability.
And he proved it. Because instead of allocating his massive intellect into maintaining those bronze supply chains or keeping the peripheral tribes in check, he dumped all the company's capital into unhinged, toxic vanity projects. Which brings us to the most infamous line item in ancient history, the wine pool and meat forest.
A symbol of excess that still resonates thousands of years later.
I am looking at my drink right now on the bar, trying to conceptualize the sheer logistics of a wine pool. He literally had a massive pool excavated on the palace grounds and just filled it with alcohol, and he planted a grove of trees where roasted meats were hung from the branches.
The literal meat forest.
Yeah, he and his inner circle would paddle around in canoes, drinking straight from the pool and eating off the trees. Now look, as a guy who appreciates a good bar, I respect the commitment to a theme, but the fiscal irresponsibility here is staggering. How does a CEO that smart think this is a good idea?
You have to look at what the wine pool represents economically. To fill a pool with alcohol, you need an immense amount of grain.
Oh, right, fermentation.
Exactly. That means thousands of peasants are laboring, not to produce food to survive and not to feed the military, but simply to produce an agricultural surplus that will be fermented and literally poured into a hole in the ground for the CEO's amusement.
That's insane.
It is the visible, undeniable destruction of corporate capital.
It's the equivalent of a modern CEO taking the entire R&D budget, putting it in a pile in the lobby, and setting it on fire while the board watches. But why didn't anyone stop him? If he was surrounded by smart executives, why didn't they step in?
Because of the arrogance we mentioned earlier,
Yeah.
King Zhu was too smart for the room. He believed that because the Shang enterprise had been dominant for 5 centuries, it was a law of nature that they would always be
He
dominant.
thought he was untouchable.
Yes. When ministers tried to warn him that the supply chains were breaking and the peasants were starving, he didn't listen. He debated them into the ground, and if they persisted, he invented horrific new execution methods for them. He drove away anyone competent.
A complete brain drain. It is the exact inverse of what Cheng Tang did at the start. The founder poached talent by being a reasonable manager. The final CEO drove talent away by being a narcissistic sociopath. And in an economy where human capital is everything, where did all those disgruntled employees go?
Straight to the competition. The Zhu tribe.
A scrappy new startup on the western frontier, they see the Shang Corporation cannibalizing itself and they make their move. Which leads to the ultimate hostile takeover, the Battle of Muye.
The final class.
King Zhu finally realizes he's under attack. He mobilizes his army, he equips them with all that superior bronze weaponry. But here is the kicker. He has completely destroyed the corporate culture. His employees despise him. So right in the middle of the battlefield, the Shang soldiers take their bronze spears, turn around, and join the competition.
A literal mutiny. It is the ultimate vote of no confidence from the ground floor.
The army flips. The front lines collapse. King Zhu realizes the company is officially bankrupt. He retreats to his palace, wraps himself in his most expensive jewels, sets the building on fire, and burns himself alive. Game over. 500 years of market dominance up in smoke.
It is a profound structural lesson. The Shang dynasty had the best technology in the world. Their bronze casting was unmatched. They had the historical infrastructure.
None of it mattered.
Exactly. Technological superiority means absolutely nothing if the enterprise succumbs to internal friction and cultural rot. You do not need a superior weapon to destroy a monopoly. You just need bad management at the top.
It is a cautionary tale that translates perfectly to the modern corporate landscape.
The historical records distill a very sharp principle from this entire arc. It's the concept of rowing upstream. In business and in empire building, not advancing is dropping back.
Wow. Not advancing is dropping back.
There is no such thing as static dominance. You are either actively maintaining your culture, reinvesting in your people, and pushing forward, or the current is quietly dragging you toward the edge of a waterfall. King Zhu thought he could just float.
Not advancing is dropping back. That's a heavy thought to leave at the bottom of a glass. We've watched this ancient family business go through it all tonight. We saw the Warm Guy founder drain the competition of its talent. We watched middle management fight for 9 generations until Pan Gang forced them into a swamp to reset the culture.
We saw Wu Ding use a hot poker and a turtle shell to build a meritocracy and corner the bronze market.
Yeah, and we watched a brilliant, arrogant CEO drink his own company into a fiery oblivion.
The complete life cycle of an organization played out over half a millennium.
So if you're sitting there listening to this and you have to clock in tomorrow morning, I want you to take a hard, cynical look around your office. Look at the people in charge. Are they out there forging the equivalent of bronze level innovations? Are they actively maintaining the supply chains and listening to the people on the ground? Or are they quietly building their own personal wine pool and meat forest in the executive suite while the rest of the foundation slowly crumbles beneath them?
Definitely something to think about.
Something to mull over on your commute tomorrow. We'll see you on the next deep dive.